Okay, welcome back everyone to our 2025 Israel Studies Winter Webinar Series. For those of you who don't know, my name is Amichai Magen, and this webinar series is brought to you by the Israel Program at the Center on Democracy, Development and the Rule of Law here at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. And this winter, this cold winter for us, we're exploring some of the main dynamics and debates shaping Israel as a society, as an economy, and as a polity. And we invite you to join us in a series of conversations on those dynamics and debates with some of Israel's leading thinkers and analysts. Our webinars are free and they're open, and you can register for as many of them as you wish on our website, cddrl.fsi.stanford.edu/Israel. Each webinar is recorded and made available on CDDRL's YouTube channel after the live event. So if you missed last week's conversation with Einat Wilf, you can catch up on that by visiting Stanford CDDRL's YouTube channel. But it's so much better to be here live because you can't pose questions to a recording. Although I'm sure that some AI startup will change that soon as well in rather Orwellian fashion. In any event, today we are truly excited and honored to be joined by Ari Shavit. Hi, Ari.
Hello.
Hey, good to see you. Ari is one of Israel's most experienced, astute, and influential journalists and political analysts. He is also a celebrated essayist and author of the New York Times bestseller, My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel. I have my copy right over here. Ari, I don't have a signed copy yet, but I'm hoping to get a signed copy.
We'll deal with that.
We'll deal with that very, very soon. Several people have told me over the last year independently that this is their absolute favorite book on Israel, and I can't recommend it enough. Ari was born in Rehovot in Israel. He studied philosophy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and then embarked on a distinguished career in print and television journalism. In the early 1990s, he was chairman of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and he served on the editorial board of Haaretz until 2016. His latest book, which in Hebrew is called Milchama Kiyumit, Existential War, and I've been nudging Ari to get an English version of this wonderful short book as quickly as possible. It was published in Hebrew in the spring of 2024, and it was really one of the first books to grapple with the strategic implications of October 7th, Hamas's invasion and massacre on October 7th, for Israeli society, the economy, and national security. So, Ari, we're delighted you were able to make time and be with us today.
It's a really pleasure and honor to be with you, and I hope we'll have a vivid, honest, and constructive conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. So before we jump into the big themes of the book, and one of the wonderful things about the book, you give full credit to a lot of really deeply informed and thoughtful people, and include Dan Meridor, Yaakov Amidror, Dan Shiftan, it's Gadi Eisenkot. It's a very long list of people that you credit. So there's a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom in the book, which we would want to touch upon. I have to already say in advance, we're not going to be able to address all the themes of the book, and that's why I'm so eager to make sure that the book comes out and reaches a wider audience as possible, because it really is a fascinating and important document. But before we do that, we've become so accustomed, Ari, to say this is a dramatic week in Israel. This is a dramatic, important day in Israel. It's a dramatic hour. And over the last year and a half, 2 or 3 years, every day seems to be incredibly dramatic. But today really is very, very special. Let's just recap. We have this kind of crazy mixture of happiness and sadness as 3 additional Israeli hostages have just been released. 5 Thai nationals have just been released. So we've seen the release of 8 live hostages today, and we're incredibly moved and happy by that. And at the same time, this is tinged with both sadness and anxiety. Sadness because as the days and as the weeks go by, we're thinking about the Bibas family, for example. We're thinking about Shir. We're thinking about Kfir, about Ariel Bibas, the family Shir with 2, 1 toddler, 1 baby, red-headed babies in her arms that was kidnapped on October 7th. And as the days and weeks pass, we see that they're not being released, and we can only draw very sad conclusions from that. So there's this crazy mixture of happiness and sadness and despair. At the same time, political strategic issues are becoming very, very urgent. We are wondering whether the first phase of this ceasefire for hostages deal will end at the end of the first phase, or whether it will continue into the second phase, about which we know much less about, and a lot of it is up for negotiation. We see, or we suspect, that there is pressure by the Trump administration and Qatar and Egypt and others not to end this deal and go back to fighting after 42 days, but to extend the ceasefire beyond the initial 6 weeks. But we don't quite know which way this is going to pan out. We know that Netanyahu is flying, I believe, this weekend, and will meet President Trump in the White House on Tuesday. He will be the first foreign leader to visit the White House in the second Trump administration. And that, of course, Ari, as you know, raises a lot of questions about the longevity of this coalition government, and whether, if the ceasefire is extended, and this means the end of the war effectively, whether this coalition government continues, or whether we're heading towards elections. So tell us a little bit, Ari, about the mood in Israel right now and your take on the latest developments.
So first of all, again, it's a real pleasure to be with you, with all our people watching us, hearing us, and thank you for having me. Look, you covered quite a lot of territory in your question, and I think some of these subjects we'll discuss when we'll talk about the book and so on. So let me first begin with the day itself. I mean, first of all, the whole process this last week has been, I mean, one cannot overstate the emotional drama. And I think that, you know, I think each and every one of us, you don't have to be Jewish or Israeli, looking at these young ladies and now this older man, they are like coming back from death. It's like a Greek mythology. I mean, I mean, October 7th was an unhuman experience, and even the recovery now is like, you know, it's mind-boggling. It's beyond our comprehension. But if trying to make some sense of it, I would say that what we saw today, let's just take it today. First of all, there were 2 events, one very well orchestrated and very like military shaped in the early morning in Israel, and the second chaotic and horrible with the mob kind of a phenomenon. So I think that what we saw today specifically, one is the astonishing phenomena of Israeli solidarity. Look, I don't want to offend. I'm very pro-American. I don't want to offend anyone on this talk, but I'm not sure there is another nation that would have paid such a high strategic price, and we'll talk about it, in order to bring back its citizens. There's something really unique when you talk about the uniqueness of Israeli exceptionality. We have many weaknesses. There are many horrible things here. But this sense of a family-like nation, the kind of bind, the feeling that we're all connected. So it was a celebration of Israeli solidarity. The fact that the whole story, I mean, the army fighting, the attempts to do the deals for such a long time, the price we are willing to pay, and we are happy to pay. 80%, if not 90% of Israelis are so happy to see the girls coming back in such a way. It's like, it's a personal, we know them all by their personal names. It's as if they entered our homes. So what you saw is the triumph of Israeli solidarity, and specifically the heroism of these amazing young ladies. I mean, when we thought of this, we all had horrible pictures in our mind. And by the way, I'm not sure what we will see in the future. I mean, this is only the beginning of a process, and I don't know what the future holds. But the heroism of these young ladies, the way they face to this evil, is amazing. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, look, what you saw in the second event, the way I don't want to use too extreme words, but the brutality, the lack of compassion, the lack of humanity. I mean, a young lady and an older man are released as part of a deal, and all this hate surrounds them, and they try to do it into a walk of shame in some sort of way. So while one is the amazing Israeli solidarity and spirit and like human heroism, you saw something very scary. And I'm one of the Israelis, it's in my book, in my writing throughout the years, I have a lot of empathy to the Palestinian tragedy, to Palestinian suffering. I understand totally the suffering in Gaza, it's in my mind. But to see this firestorm of hate surrounding them was the second element of the day. And I think that the third element, and that has to do, again, with what we will discuss in the coming hour, is that the outcome of this war is still totally unclear. The jury is still out. In a sense, I think that what you see, the deal, and I'm all for the deal, but it exposed the fact that Israel did not achieve the decisive victory it was supposed to achieve in Gaza. And here I'll go into the larger picture. I think that the irony of the war is Israel did not achieve the aims, the goals of war that were set at the beginning. Ironically, it achieved many other goals that were not planned, and we'll probably discuss it, which actually improve its strategic position. Mm-hmm. But the specific goal of destroying Hamas as a military organization and as a political organization, they are not there. Ari, so that day, while you had this emotional catharsis and excitement and jubilation, in a cold-headed way, you see that we are facing a serious strategic struggle, because unlike Mosul, where the Americans-led coalition did basically what we did in Gaza, but achieved victory over ISIS, and ISIS was gone at the end of it, this is not the situation here.
Ari, let's just remind our audience of the three goals articulated by the Israeli war cabinet in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. There were three goals. One was the return of all the hostages. Second, to degrade and destroy Hamas militarily. And third, to end Hamas's political control of Gaza. And the observation that you are making is that if we sort of put aside the tremendous joy, which has national security value. This is not just about emotion. This is about national solidarity and resilience. But if we sort of zoom out and look at the three strategic goals articulated vis-a-vis Gaza, I'm putting aside Lebanon and Iran, none of these has been fully achieved. They've been partially
exactly. This is
fully achieved.
This is the point. And again, the point is not criticizing the deal. I fully support the deal. But the deal exposes the fact, because, look, again, if you look at the history of the war, the short history of the war, if I may, you had this traumatic, horrible day of October 7th. Then you had the last quarter of 2023, where Israel did rather well. Society united, you saw resilience. The army recovered and actually ran a rather successful, with high human cost, successful campaign. It led to the first hostages deal. The relationships with the Biden administration at the time were good. We prevented a regional war. We prevented all. There was reasonable success. Then there were 8 months where nothing happened. It was like down. It was a bit like kind of World War I thing. It was kind of, and then came the amazing strategic turnaround with the Beeper operation and all the rest, September, October, November, when Israel suddenly became, it regained its deterrence, it regains its stature in the neighborhood, not only in the neighborhood, I think in America as well. Even Americans don't like losers. They prefer winners to losers. And Israel, there was a major transformation, which is hugely important for our security. What's happening now is that once again, the outcome is not clear. It's not as bad as it was a year ago, but it's not as good as it seemed 2-3 months ago, because you see that the core issue, the Gaza issue, we have not, after all this suffering, I mean, so many Israelis got killed, so much pain, so many Palestinians died, so much damage, all that. And the outcome is that Hamas is still there. So it's not what it used to be. Obviously, they are pretending to be stronger than they are, but they have not vanished. And if you think about the fact that these are the people who committed the outrageous crimes of October 7th, and which is really ISIS-like, Nazi-like, you make your comparison. What happened, not only for Israelis, the importance of October 7th, it was an attack on the Jewish state, on the democratic state, and it was an attack on the free world. It was people with 11th century values who acquired 21st century capabilities and are risking our civilization, the free world. And after 15, 16 months, they're still there. That's troubling. With the jubilation is there. And as you rightly said, we should have done it because that's our strength. This solidarity is our strength, but we have to be realistic about where we are strategically.
Ari, I want to now, we can spend an hour just talking about what's happening in Israel today, and we won't do that because I want to get to the book, and I want to start with what you call the Israeli condition, right? And I want us to sort of begin with a kind of Yuval Noah Harari big picture about core fundamental principles of Israeli national security as they were articulated even in the pre-state Yeshuv. Most famously, we're thinking about Zev Jabotinsky's 1923 essay, The Iron Wall, and David Ben-Gurion, founding father of Israel, his famous security doctrine. I want to, I don't think we're going to sort of rehash them, but I want to suggest to you, just thinking about Jabotinsky, thinking about Ben-Gurion, but also thinking about how you've articulated this in your book, is that essentially Israeli national security is built on 5 fundamental principles. Okay, and I want to articulate them and get your response. And let me just add that our enemies, whether it's Yahya Sinwar or whether it was the late Qasem Soleimani or the Iranians, they understand these principles very, very well. And maybe maybe there are periods where they understand these principles and how to undermine these principles better than we understand those principles. And there are periods when Israelis don't think about these principles very much. But they are fundamental to understanding Israel's national security. Okay, so the first principle is that Israel depends on a high degree of internal cohesion and solidarity. And what I would particularly emphasize, what I like to call this a serving, sacrificing elite. Without an elite that serves and sacrifices, Israel is in deep trouble. So that's principle number 1. You have to have internal social cohesion. You can't let things get out of hand too much. Principle number 2, qualitative human advantage, which means that you need to have an excellent educational system and you need to have a technological advantage because you don't have the numbers and you are trying to live a normal life and you really are very dependent on high quality human and technological advantage compared to your enemies. Principle number 3, Israel is territorially tiny, which means that you can't afford to have battles occur on your territory. You need to take the war elsewhere. Principle number 4, the Israeli economy and society are vulnerable, which means that wars have to be rare, they have to be short, and they have to be won decisively. We can't afford these long wars of attrition where you can't land at Ben Gurion International Airport for periods of a month or 6 months. Okay. We need foreign investment. We need foreign trade. So wars have to be short and they have to be rare. Last but not least, and this is where Europe becomes central, America becomes central, Japan becomes central, South Korea becomes central. Israel depends on international support and legitimacy and acceptance in the international system, especially by the West, and it has to avoid entanglement with global superpowers that can do it real harm, and it has to avoid entanglements with international courts and tribunals that would neutralize its ability to defend themselves. Okay, so those, to my mind, and please respond to this. Maybe I'm missing a principle, and please correct me. But I think those are the 5 principles.
Amichai, this is amazing. I mean, you articulate it much better than I do. But I totally agree with your synopsis here. So let me begin elsewhere. Let me begin where you began, because I really think that in this sense, the Jewish national movement is an astonishing phenomena, because it's a movement of people who had no political heritage. We did not have sovereignty for 2,000 years. And in our first decade or two, we produced astonishing political, diplomatic, and strategic genius, from Herzl to Weizmann to Jabotinsky to Ben Gurion. I'm a Ben Gurion fan, but all of them. And so their thinking was so profound and brilliant. And if I may say, they had what we miss so much today is, I would say, brutal honesty or intellectual cruelty. They looked at their first principle, before all these principles you talk about, is let's look at reality in the eye. Let's not be sentimental. We have our values, but we have to look at it. And what they saw is a tragic reality. I mean, they led the movement, but they realized it became a tragedy. So let's begin with Jabotinsky. His essay, 1923, The Iron Wall, not the Iron Curtain, but the Iron Wall, Kira Barzel, is genius in the sense he's a right-wing, he's a nationalist, but he's a liberal nationalist. It's a very tough essay, but written with astonishing respect to the Arabs. He didn't talk about Palestinians at that time. Yeah. I wish our right-wing parties and leaders would have had that kind of attitude. I mean, he was not condescending. But he said he realized that by creating a Jewish, democratic, somewhat Western entity in the Middle East, we are into almost internal war. I mean, the conflict is built into the situation. That's the Israeli condition. And he said the only way we can deal with this is to create such an iron wall that they will attack us once, twice, 3 times. We will overcome, and then they will accept us, and there will be a piece of acceptance, not a piece of respect or love. You know,
and Ari, let's just explain. By iron wall, we don't mean a physical wall. We mean such a strong.
The idea is that
explain the
you
idea.
have to realize that you'll have several rounds of wars and you need decisive victories in all of them until people will give up on attacking. Now, Jabotinsky was brilliant. He was a great speaker, a great journalist, a great author. He was not a great practical person. So the amazing luck or genius, or I don't know, invisible hand behind Zionism was that David Ben-Gurion created Jabotinsky's Iron Wall. Now, just to understand the Ben-Gurion genius, Ben-Gurion, again, we don't have the time to describe all that he did, but in 1953, the prime minister and defense minister of a small, tiny, intimidated, poor nation takes a few months off and does a kind of seminar to understand the Israeli condition. And he comes with a defense doctrine that shaped Israel, which is your principles are actually. So he actually builds the Iron Wall by building the army, building Dimona, building the alliance with France, which was important. And again, to cut a long story short, the 6-day victory, the 67 victory, is the ultimate military outcome of that doctrine. And that led, as they anticipated, to the peace agreements with Egypt, with Jordan, even the Abraham Accords now. So the theory worked in the most amazing way. And I won't go back into it. What was the fundamental understanding? And this is why I think it's relevant. It was an understanding that forever we are a frontier democracy. And this is, and I think when people try to understand the Israeli story, the Israeli-Palestinian story, Israel is exceptional because we are in Amsterdam surrounded by Damascus, Beirut, and Gaza. And our challenge is how to keep our Amsterdam values and our Amsterdam identity while living in this harsh neighborhood. And the whole point is not to become, God forbid, semi-fascist, militaristic, fanatical, not all these things, to keep your values as a free society, as a thriving, life-loving, freedom-loving, free society, while facing an impossible condition. And the old way they did it is everything you described it, but to turn it into the point was short, decisive wars, a reserve army. That the idea behind it is just as you said. We don't want to become North Korea or the Soviet Union. They didn't repeat the mistakes the Soviets made. They said, we want to live as a democracy and to fight as a democracy. So the reserve army is you create a huge army of a small nation for a short period of time, so your economy will not. Sadly, what happened, and that's the next stage, is that it was so successful that we became victims of the success. And in the 21st century, our leaders, political and military, have lost this kind of sharp understanding of the Israeli condition, and that led to October 7th.
We lost the sense of tragedy, and we believed that we were living at the top of the Maslow hierarchy of human needs, of self-expression, as a result of this incredible success of Israel, particularly in the aftermath of the Second Intifada. I mean, when you look at sort of the Israeli economy, the infrastructure, the quality of life in Israel, from 2006, 7, 8 until today, a doubling of the Israeli GDP per capita, et cetera, so that people need to understand that on the eve of October 7th, Israelis believed that they were living in a Middle Eastern version of, some would say, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and we were reminded by what Henry Kissinger liked to call the inevitability of tragedy.
So I'll tell you that when I gave lectures in America, when my book came out 10 years ago, I said Israelis live in a kind of illusion, as if there was a series of explosions along the Jordan Valley. Israel was disconnected from the Middle East. We are drifting in the Mediterranean. We just passed Crete, and we are on our way to Ibiza. That was the illusion and again, the way the challenge facing us now is because again, I want to emphasize, it's so important to keep our values and our way of life as a free society. And this is why I think that we need so much the alliance with the free world. And I wish the free world will understand our role as its frontier, because we are really facing the challenge of being, a true democracy, a liberal democracy, while facing all this. So you need, I call it in my book, a kind of Athens-Sparta balance. You need, and again, the example I give is of the 1960s, when Israel was already becoming a real democracy, by the way, social democracy. But Yitzhak Rabin, as chief of staff, built the best military machine around in this tiny nation. And this kind of balance was lost in recent years. And we have to find that balance again.
Yeah. So Ari, before we get into your analysis of what went wrong, and then how do we rise from the tragedy of October 7th, and what should be the principles guiding us going forward? First of all, I just want to remind people that you can submit your questions to the Q&A tab, please, not the chat tab, just the Q&A tab, as we are in conversation. But before we get into that, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking two things. One is, it could so easily have been the case that Israel would not have been a democracy, because it would have privileged the mobilization and the militaristic aspect, especially during the 1950s and 60s and 70s and the 80s during the Cold War. But Israel never did that. It always combined the patriotic, nationalistic with the liberal, and that was a tremendous source of strength, both in terms of freedom and extracting the best out of the Israeli population in terms of creativity and innovation, of course. And then it served us also very, very well once the Cold War was over, because we had all the political, we bet on democracy and we bet on free markets. And so we were able to rush forward. But that tremendous success, of course, also bred some complacency and some liberal fantasies about the region that we were living in, and what we could afford and not afford as a society and as a state. The second thought that I have, listening especially to your analysis of Jabotinsky's notion of the iron wall, and anybody who's interested, I will post a copy of the essay. It's a brilliant essay. As Ari said, Jabotinsky was arguably not only a great orator, but just a fantastic essayist. But one way to think about the contemporary Middle East is around the question of who is convinced that the iron wall is persuasive and who is convinced that the iron wall is unpersuasive, right? So there is a camp of Arab states. I would put Egypt there, Jordan there, certainly the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and others that have basically followed the logic of Jabotinsky's iron wall. We may not like the Jews, we may not favor Zionism, but Israel is a fact. It is not going anywhere. It is not the French in Algeria. It's not about to disappear. This is not a crusader state that we'll be able to get rid of in 70 or 100 years. And therefore, if you can't beat them, join them, or at least make your peace with them. Okay. But then there's another narrative, which we saw with Hassan Nasrallah, which the Iranians are driving, but which is also there in radical Sunni circles, which is that the iron wall is a farce. It's a fantasy. Israeli society is decadent. It is divided. It is weak. And all we need to do is to fight this kind of war of annihilation by attrition, and the whole thing is going to fall apart. Hassan Nasrallah used to famously compare Israeli society to like a spider's web, right? If you just push against the spider's web, it's going to fall apart. He discovered that Israeli society is a spider's web in the sense that it's very, very strong and very resilient. But he was thinking that we could be pushed over. So in many respects, I think understanding. Oh, and by the way, there are people who are sitting on the fence. What are the Saudis thinking? Are the Saudis buying into the iron wall argument, or are they still not convinced about which way we're going to go? I think this is also a conversation that we Israelis are having with themselves. Are we the Israel of October 7th, or are we the Israel of the Beeper operation? Who are we, right? So that metaphor, that analogy of the iron wall, I think is incredibly relevant for us 100 years, more than 100 years after the essay was written.
So if I may, and I hope it won't be Israeli chutzpah, I'd like to try systematically go over three things. The mistakes that led to October 7th, the mistakes during the war, and where do we face ourselves now? Basically, beyond the military analysis, Netanyahu took the Iron Wall and he made it in his autobiography. He wrote about the Iron Triangle. He was very proud of the fact that he created a successful economy that can fund a very strong military that together create political power. Sadly, he was only right about the economy because the military was not strong enough and the political power is questionable. But when the book was published, 2022, and I'm not getting into the controversy with him, I said, what happened during the Netanyahu years, Israel of the last 15 years, is that we totally missed the other triangle, which I call the golden triangle, which is a strong functioning state, a cohesive society, and a neshama, and a kind of ethos that holds us together. These are things we had in the past and we lost. And this totally corresponds with what we said. And I'm all for free market and startup nation and the high tech, but we somehow thought, we had the illusion that if we have the technology and we have the successful economy, all other issues are much less important. That was the major mistake. And the fundamental lesson for us now is to rebuild the state and unite society and create this new Israeli narrative and ethos that will keep us together. That's what led us to October 7th. The major mistake during the war, there were two. One was not immediately to realize that this is not about Hamas, this is about Iran. It later on happened, and I hope we can discuss it, because the significance of October 7th is that actually it was the beginning of the Israeli-Iranian war, of the real war, which has implications for the entire West. And so the challenge facing us at the end of the war is still, I say, Iran. It's nuclear Iran, conventional Iran, and terror-sponsored Iran. And so these are the challenges, and I think we should discuss them soon. But what happened, and by the way, the problem that led to the lack of success in Gaza is lack of strategic thinking, because we had rather effective military operations, again, with a terrible high human price. But there was the brilliant strategy of Sinwar was not military. It was to use the weakness of Israel as a democracy, to use Israeli society in order to weaken our standing, and to use American society in order hoping it will turn against Israel. Now, it didn't all work out because America is still with Israel and Israeli society survived, but elements of that are still relevant, while we didn't do anything political or civilian. We did not creating an alternative to Hamas was the major strategic mistake of the war on our side. Now, where are we now? We are in a very interesting situation because of what happened not in Gaza. Look, hope lies in the fact, before we get into the challenges, I think that Israel is fundamentally strong with all the problems and weaknesses, that Iran is fundamentally weak. Eventually, the regime will be gone, and we will see a different Iran. And the most important phenomena is Arab modernity that we, in a way, we've not seen before. What happened first in the Gulf and it's spreading to other parts of the Arab world, we've never seen it. You know, when the Abraham Accords were signed, or even before they were signed, I wrote an article about my dear friend, the Emirates ambassador in Washington, whom I think deserves the Nobel Prize because he actually did the Abraham Accords, Yusuf. And I wrote about him. Yusuf is the Arab I've been waiting for 100 years. Because at last you have an Arab approach that is pragmatic, that is future-oriented, not victimhood, not obsessed with the past. And this, the potential synergy between that attitude, we already see it in the relationship between Dubai and Tel Aviv. But I think the potential there is huge. So where are we now? We actually have three axes now in the Middle East. You have the potential moderate coalition. I mean, you have a basis of it, but it has to be increased. Israel, the Emirates as the best example, but Jordan, Egypt, hopefully Saudi Arabia and so on. You have the extreme Shiite radical led by Iran, and now you have the new extreme Sunni axis, Turkey, Qatar, Syria, and Islamic Brotherhood organizations all over the Middle East. So the post-war, if there is a pause in the war now, actually the map is more complicated. It's not just moderates against Iranian-led extremists. You have this new Turkish Qatar axis, which has Qatar is so far the political winner of the war in a most amazing way, and Turkey is the winner. So you have Turkey was not in the Arab world for 100 years. And so you have dramatic changes here. And to answer your question, obviously, the moderate Sunni Arabs understand that even if they don't love the Jews or the Jewish state, we are the most reliable neighbor. And because they are pragmatic, the potential there is huge. With the two other coalitions, we have a huge problem. I'll say just one thing about our new friends, that in a sense, American failure helped forge this alliance. Because I don't want to get into specific names, but 10 years ago, there was such despair regarding American policy in the Middle East that Arabs and Israelis decided we have no other option but to work together. I call it the alliance of the orphans, the people who stopped trusting American support began working together. That's the most promising phenomena in the region, but that does not mean we do not face enormous challenges with the two dangerous forces that I described.
Yeah. Well, again, we should have a separate conversation about Turkey, Israel, Lebanon, Syria. There's so much going on there. But your point is that paradoxically, the weakening of Hezbollah, Hamas, and even Iran has in a way complicated things, because we risk seeing the replacement of a radical Shia crescent with a new radical Sunni crescent. And then the question is, which one of these narratives wins inside the Sunni world, the pragmatic, hopeful one, or the more radical one?
If I may, I don't want to any time I prefer now Turkey to Iran. I mean, Iran, and we didn't discuss it. We should discuss more the Iranian threat, but Turkey creates a different kind of tensions and issues, and long term it creates another challenge. But still, I think that I think this is very important. We have to understand that the core of instability in the Middle East is the regime in Iran, not the people of Iran, or whom I believe in. And as long as there is a powerful regime in Tehran with this crazy agenda and high capabilities, I said it briefly before, the greatest danger to the Middle East, to Israel, to the Middle East, and to world order is people with 11th century values who acquire 21st century technology. That's the Iranian nuclear project. If, God forbid, Iran goes nuclear, the implications are disastrous. So although right now Iran is weaker, Israel did a very good job there, but even a weaker Iran is still a very dangerous Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. Ari, I was sort of rereading the book last night, and one of the themes that comes up is that you have this deep concern about both the internal weaknesses of Israel and then these external threats. So in a way, I don't want to put any kind of words in your mouth, but in some respects, it sounds that you're more concerned about the lack of social cohesion, what you call the political rot, the institutional sclerosis that has taken hold in Israeli society. As we became this kind of material success, we lost a lot of the spirit, the neshama, and how those weaknesses have interacted with and are continuing to interact with external threats. So before we turn to questions, and there are quite a few of them now, could you spend a little bit of time sharing with us your thoughts about the capacity, your belief or lack of belief in the capacity of the Israeli political system? I want you to put on your not the strategic hat, but the political commentator's hat. I think a deep concern for people who follow Israeli politics today is that despite the tremendous pain and shock of October 7th, in many respects, we're back to October 6th when it comes to the internal in the internal divisions. How are you thinking about the capacity of the Israeli political system for renewal? Because without this reform and renewal, these weaknesses are likely not only to continue but to be exacerbated. So maybe get your thoughts on that, and then we'll open it up to questions. I have a ton more questions. I'd love to think how your thinking about the book has changed over the last 2 or 3 months, but I'm not sure we're going to have.
So we'll find the right. We'll do it. So again, because the conversation developed into a Jabotinsky Ben Gurion. Let me tell you about that. I think, first of all, and this is, look, the moral dimension is so important. Ben Gurion said, we need strength, we need to capture the moral high ground. We always, kochenu v'tzidkaten, our righteousness and our strength and this is so important to keep because of everything we talked about, this frontier democracy. The danger of contaminating our soul is all the time there. And we have to be very, so by the way, I say, like in a simplistic way, I say to my friends on the center left, power is not a dirty word. I mean, power is essential. And I say to my friends on the right, power is not brutality, it's not expansionism, it's not extremism, it's not xenophobia. This kind of building power while restraining it and while putting it in a moral, democratic, liberal context, that's a challenge. Now, I'll say something about Biden. So in order to do that, Jabotinsky was a nationalist, always had the liberal element. He understood it was so important to him. It was national liberal, and he admired the individual rights. He was willing, he said he wanted to have an Arab deputy prime minister or even prime minister. I mean, total equality. He was not willing to accept like crude, brutal nationalism. Ben Gurion had his socialism, which was at the time, that was the balancing thing, that we are recovering as a nation from our tragedy, but we care about universal values. We are not in a kind of egocentric, ethnocentric entity. We cannot, that's not us. So that was historically. Now, specifically with what you talk about, the internal problem, Ben Gurion's greatest fear was that we are our worst enemies. We have a problem with anti-Semitism, people hate us, but the fact that we destroyed ourselves, the first Commonwealth and the second Commonwealth, Beit Rishon, Beit Sheni. And therefore, he created what he called mamlachtiyut, which I'm looking for an English term. I call it republicanism, but a kind of identity based on the republic. It was very much a republican spirit. And the tragedy of Israel, beyond the defense doctrine that we talked about, that was actually a manifestation of that. That this mamlachtiyut, this republican spirit, disintegrated in the last 30, 40 years, never mind whose fault. So when I look at Israel, and I wrote about it in a previous book that I wrote that was not translated, by the way, called Beit Shlishi, the Third Commonwealth, and I said, there is an amazing gap in Israel between real Israel and political Israel. Real Israel, we combine modernity and tradition, family values with individualism, economic. Israelis are amazing, and you saw it in the war, you see it everywhere. The innovation, it's not only the technological thing is one of the manifestations. I say the fact that we make more babies than any other OECD country is the most striking fact there is, because we are like really an exceptional entity. No one planned it, but Israel is amazing. Political Israel is horrible, because since we lost the Ben-Gurions and the Begins and the Rabins in the last 20, 30 years, it's in decay. I mean, the leadership, this way or the other, is not worthy in a serious way. The political system is dysfunctional. So the outcome of the war, we are facing a real make or break moment. It's not a cliche. When we get to our elections this year, next year, we must rebuild the Israeli Republic. It's not only the military issues and the strategy. We need a functioning state that is market friendly, business friendly. But if I give the examples of several countries that function, and we have to reunite society, because once again, the internal danger, the hate, the tribalism. I know you have some issues in America as well, but we cannot afford it. We cannot afford it. So the internal challenge or threat is as important. I'll finish with the sentence. You know, as you hear me, I'm very much worried about Iran and the Iranian centrifuges. But what I describe as the Israeli centrifuge troubles me even more. There is a kind of society we lack a center, a unifying center, and these forces that are tearing us apart are very strong, and we must find a way of dealing with that.
Yeah. And in this respect, maybe Iran and Israel are much more similar than people tend to understand, because they have their internal tensions. We have our internal tensions, and the question is, you know, which one is going to fragment first? Anyway, again, we can spend a lot of time on this. I'm increasingly concerned by the inability of the current Israeli political system to sort of generate the kind of broad centrist coalitions that we need for recuperating and rebuilding ourselves. But this is a subject for a longer conversation. Let me turn to the questions that we have, and one of the themes that has come up here, Ari, you and I have been talking a lot about the we and about Israelis, etc. And a question has come here from Jay Siegel. Does the we, with respect to Israeli democracy, include well, he says the Palestinians living in Israel? I assume that he means Israeli Arabs. And let me just clarify. I view Arab Israelis as first and foremost Israeli citizens. They're my brothers and sisters. They are my co-patriots. They are part of the shared public space and society that we all inhabit together. That's certainly my approach. But Ari, could you comment on where Arab Israelis that make up roughly 20% of the Israeli population fit into this conversation?
So definitely, just to answer the question, definitely the we includes all Israeli citizens, never mind what's their race, nationality, gender, anything. I mean, there is no question about it. And by the way, on October 7th, quite a number of Arab Israelis, even Muslim Israelis, were murdered. And one of the good things you saw in all this tragedy of this year, that actually, while the Sinwar plan was to try to have the Arabs in Israel, the Palestinian Israelis, whatever you want to call them, rebel against Israel and have some riots, that didn't work because at the end of the day, I think that with all their justified grievances and criticism of the Jewish Zionist states, I think that in real life, the vast majority, I'm talking about 80, 90% of Arabs in Israel, realize that although they want more rights, rightly so, and more justice, their life under the Knesset in Jerusalem is much better than the lives of any other Palestinians or Arabs all around us. I mean, there isn't another, and they appreciate it. It's not in the discourse. I'm afraid that not always, it's talked about in American universities, in the media, but I think that actually on the ground there is much more a sense of togetherness. Again, I don't want to romanticize it. There are a lot of tensions and issues, but you saw that during this war, Israeli society did not break up because at the end of the day, we all felt that Arab Israelis are totally part of us. The Jewish Israelis felt so, and the Arab Israelis, and this eruption never happened. So definitely, but it's of the challenges facing us is definitely, look, we have a problem with two major minorities in Israel proper, the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs that have to be fully integrated into society. So it's going to be a long process, but we have to launch it. Definitely equal rights, also equal duties, and total. I must tell you that again, in real life, there's been a huge improvement in the last 10, 15 years. The numbers of Arabs in universities, you walk into an Israeli hospital, it's run by Arabs. I mean, which was not the case. I mean, Arabs used to be the male nurses 40 years ago. Now they run the hospitals. So there's been, again, talking about the real life process, there's been a lot of improvement. I think we still have to do more in order to fully integrate. And again, where there is still injustice and inequality, we have to deal with this. So we will all be really one. Again, with keeping our different identities, but in communities, but being part of this one republic.
Yeah, and we also saw the public response to the release of Israeli Arab hostages. There is an Israeli Arab hostage that's expected to be released as part of the 33 hostages that are going to be released, hopefully in this first phase of the ceasefire deal. So yeah, that's been something that's been very heartening for me to see. We have a couple of additional questions that relate to the campus protests that we saw in the United States and Canada, elsewhere in the aftermath of October 7th. The experience for people who were outside of Israel on October 7th was in many respects compounded by what we called October 8th, which is that before Israel even fired one shot in retaliation against Hamas, we saw Israel being accused. We saw exhilaration and happiness at what has happened to in the massacre of Israelis, but we also saw Israel immediately being accused of genocide before it even responded to the genocidal attack against it on October 7th. Ari, what do you make of those kind of manifestations, particularly on American university campuses, and how much do they matter in the big scheme of things?
Look, I said that the significance of October 7th, that it was an attack on the Jewish state, on the not occupation, not settlements, because it wasn't an attack on settlements. It was an attack in the one place where Israel went back to the 67 lines and dismantled settlements. It was an attack on the democratic state. Think of all these clubbers, the people who were celebrating life and war attack. It was an attack on the free world, as I said. But what happened the next day was an attack on the Jewish people. And sadly, what we see here, that we were taken back in time. I mean, we've seen now phenomena, and I'm not saying it's all anti-Semitism. And this is why I totally agree with your October 8th statement, because I can totally understand, I can agree, disagree with people who criticize Israeli bombing, the way we fight and all that. There are issues to discuss. But what happened on October 8th is unacceptable. The fact that when we were ultimate victims, when you had the worst pogrom since the Holocaust, and we did not fight back yet, and in some American campuses, at some media outlets, in social media, the reaction was an attack, and in many ways an anti-Semitic attack. That's frightening, and this is, I think, why part of the challenges that we face. I will divide it into two. I think that one, we do see the ugly face of new anti-Semitism, and basically, what do you see? It's the inability to accept the fact that Jews have a right of self-determination and the right of self-defense. This is the new anti-Semitism, and I think it's horrible, and we see it it's in our face. I think there is another more gentle issue, which I think that there was a kind of state of mind that developed in academia and in media, America, in Europe, which became somewhat detached from the realities of history and the world we live in. And I think there was a temptation to reduce all issues to attacks on America and attacks on Israel. Now, America is not the saint and Israel is not the saint, but this obsession of not seeing the complexities of reality around and being just attacking America and Israel and blaming America and Israel for everything, I think that was a flawed intellectual academic approach. And I hope we will see some change in that sense. So you had, again, two elements. One is the brutal, aggressive anti-Semitism coming back, and another, this tendency not to deal with reality and history as they are.
Yeah. Ari, in the time that we have, there are two themes here that I'm picking up from the questions that I would love for you to address. One is internal and sort of future-oriented in terms of where Israeli society is going, and the other is regional. The domestic oriented question has to do with the young generation in Israel and the youth, and your impression of the levels of trust, the levels of energy of young people in Israel today as they look at Israel and its future. You know, there was a lot of concern in circles, in security circles in Israel over the last 2 or 3 decades, as the country was getting to be more wealthy, more individualistic. Israeli kids became spoiled, and we were talking about the TikTok generation, about the a generation that was very much concerned with itself and less with the country. I think in many respects, one of the amazing surprises of the last year and a half has been this remarkable mobilization of young Israelis. We see it in the army, but we also see it elsewhere, and the willingness to sacrifice. So, but on the other hand, we also see public opinion data in Israel where a lot of young people are having questions about the future of the country. So how do we reconcile that? Let's start with this, and let's end with a regional question really having to do with Turkey. A lot of people are interested in sort of Turkey, Syria, but let's start with the domestic.
Okay, yeah. I think this is a very important issue. Both are, and you said it. I totally agree with what you said. I think that we were saved by our reserve army. What's a reserve army? It's 200, 300,000, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45-year-old people who left their homes, left their loved ones, and became soldiers and risked their lives. And again, if you look at it in perspective, This is the beauty of a democracy. This is the beauty of a frontier democracy, where people care. It's not a dictatorship. Look what happened to the armies of tyrants. They crumble. Look what happened in Syria, what happened to the Russian army. You saw the strength of Israeli society as a free society, that within hours, people left everything and rushed to the front to fight, risking their lives, and then going on 100 days, 200 days. So ironically, tragically, the military reserve service is like a very impressive manifestation of citizenship, in a free society. But I think that talking about the younger people who are the main, the 25, 30, 35-year-old people here, they gave the leadership of the country one last chance. I think if we fail them, although the leadership, my generation, people older than me, people younger, we failed them. We did not produce a republic that is worthy of their values and their sacrifice. And they said, in spite of everything, we are going out there, we are risking ourselves, and we will save our home. But if now we don't act and fix everything, I think that the danger of a kind of erosion of that commitment over time is there. So I said it's a make or break moment. That's the issue. That we have to fix political Israel so it's worthy of the amazing sacrifice of these amazing young men and women who prove to us how amazing they are, but they're also, I think, saying to us, time for change.
Yeah, and so this makes the next elections critical, absolutely critical.
Crucial. Again, I don't want to get here into specifics, but the gap in Israel between the resilience, the wisdom, the talent, the creativity, the sense of humor, the vitality of real society, and the despicable, I have no other word, despicable patterns of our political life, political system, political class. And you used the term before that, which I like. You said sacrificing elite. I will do with serving elite. Sacrificing is nice, but demanding a lot. We must have a serving elite. And when you see that on the one hand, it's like mind-boggling. Well, I'll tell you a personal story. My son, I don't want to get into details, he's in the military, and my wife and I, his mother, we went to a ceremony of his some in his base, and on the way there was some horrific political drama that was disgusting. And then we came there and met not only our beloved son, but all his friends. They are so impressive. They have dignity. They have integrity. They have commitment. They are fine young men and women, and the gap is just impossible. And we have to overcome this gap in the coming year or two.
Yeah, that gap between Israeli society and the dysfunctionality of the political system. In some respects, that gap has always been there, but I think it's fair to say that it's never been bigger, and the stakes have never been higher. And we should continue to talk about that, Ari. Hopefully, we'll find an opportunity to do that again. I want to end with a question that has to do with this kind of possibility of a rising radical Sunni arc, and in particular with the role of Turkey and Syria, which I know again is sort of a large and complicated topic. But Nancy Andrews asks the question: can you say a little bit more about the geopolitical shift underway with Turkey's influence in the region and the dissolution of the Syrian Assad regime? I know this is a very fluid situation, but maybe Ari, you can finish on that, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, but if I may, I'll combine it also, because that's the troubling part. I want to combine it with the regional hopeful part. But let's begin with answering this question. So, look, what you see, as I said before, for the first time in 100 years, Turkey is back. Turkey is part of the Arab world. It wasn't Iran. Now, Turkey has its ambitions, and it's somewhat dangerous. It's not as dangerous as Iran, but it's funding, like the people in Syria, funding is very close to the Islamic Brotherhood. So now you have two sources, Qatar and Turkey, that are sponsoring Islamic Brotherhood organizations all over the Middle East, which creates a real problem. The issue of Syria, we don't know where it will go. In a sentence, the dilemma is, do you want a divided Syria, or do you want actually one Syria that, with all the problems there, will be something of a stabilizer? One of the challenges that we face now following the war is chaotic situations, failed states all around us, and chaotic situations. We have it in Gaza, you have it in Lebanon, you have it in Syria, and you have to develop a strategy to deal with that. So my hope that is, again, that we will be able, that something will emerge there in Syria, that it won't be a liberal democracy. I don't think that you'll have Copenhagen in Damascus soon, but hopefully you will have a regime that is stability seeking, and that will stabilize the issue and will not create immediate threats. I must say, I'm personally very concerned by the fact, even with this deal, that Qatar is the political winner of this war. They were very much responsible to what happened, and they're very sophisticated with a lot of influence. The combination of Turkey with them is something to worry about. And I hope the American administration, that has good relations with both, will not be naive and will actually try to deal with that issue. Just one hopeful sentence. As I said, the situation is not as bad as it was a year ago, but not as good as it was 3 months ago. Hope is really with the Saudi deal that will lead not only to a real Arab-Israeli peace, but to a Jewish-Muslim peace. It will lead to Indonesia. It has a lot of implications. And then we can have a Marshall Plan for Gaza, which is essential. I call it a kind of Dubai in Gaza 2050. That's the kind of thing that we should bring. And dealing with the Palestinian issue for once in a realistic, constructive way. So after all this trouble, with the great danger of Iran there, with chaos and radicalism around, if moderate Arabs and moderate Israelis will work together with American leadership on creating a new, stable Middle East, there will be reason for hope.
Now, I couldn't agree with you more, Ari. If there's a silver lining of the tragedy of the last year and a half, it lies in the fact that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become worse, but the Israeli-Arab conflict has never been closer to being resolved. And if we do have a Middle East Stability Pact, you know, if President Trump wants to call it the Trump Peace Prosperity Pact or deal of the century, all the more credit to him. But that will create opportunities to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that simply did not exist in the past. It will really expand. It will really expand the toolkit and would allow us to move forward on that critical issue. Now, because I've been nudging Ari to translate his excellent new book, Milchama Kiyumit, Me'ason leNitzachon leTkuma, from Hebrew to English, last night I took the liberty of translating, Ari, a quote from page 77 of the book, and I want to end on that. Hopefully you'll think I'm a good enough translator. I'm not a professional translator, but I would encourage you to make these ideas maybe an updated version of the book for an English audience. I think that will be very, very important. But let me finish on a quote and then thank you. And here goes. In the years 2024-25, Israel faces a Herculean challenge She must face the existential threat posed by the Iranian superpower and its proxy terrorist armies, Hezbollah and Hamas, but it must also rebuild its strategic posture and place in the world. At the same time, Israel must deal with its internal political rot, institutional sclerosis, and an unprecedented national trauma. In this hour of emergency, the Jewish democratic state is required to fill the identity, ideational, ethical, and conceptual vacuum that has opened up at the heart of Israeli life. Israel must define itself anew to recuperate, to win the war, and to launch itself on a new path. But none of this can be done without an overarching national strategy and without a comprehensive national security strategy properly implemented. It is absolutely essential to go back to the fundamental insights of Jabotinsky and Ben-Gurion and to adapt those insights to the challenging realities of the 21st century. I think
you're an amazing interviewer and an amazing translator. So
I think that's beautiful. It captures it, and it gives us a workable agenda to go forward to, and much to look forward to in Ari's writing and work. So Ari, thank you so much for this time.
Thank you very much.
We can do this again. Next week, we will be in conversation with the former head of Israel's National Economic Council, Eugene Kandel, and from the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law here at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. Toda rabah, thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ari. Bye-bye.
Thank you.